What is going on, my beautiful people? Welcome to yet again another episode of the Pivot Mindset Podcast. My name is Justin. I am your host, and welcome. If you're checking out this podcast for the very first time, we ask that one, if you are enjoying this, if you are blessed by what we talk about today, that you will give this podcast a rating and review. That is what keeps these podcasts going and keeps the algorithm for allowing other people to explore this podcast by you providing insights and letting people know that this is a good podcast, which we aspire to be. For all of my loyal listeners and all of our subscribers and people that are consistently showing up every single day, we thank you for being a part of this pivot community, because we here believe that life is all about the pivots, and those who decide to make the pivots decide to become successful. Y'all, we just finished our 50th episode. Last week was episode 50. Man, I can't imagine. When I first started this podcast, I didn't have vision for 50. I had vision for 6. The stats say that that most podcasts don't make it past 6 episodes. And so when I first started mine, I just wanted to get to 6. That's all I had vision for. It was, man, if we could just knock out 6 episodes, we'll be, we'll be over the hump. We'll be half the battle. And so now to get to 50 is absolutely amazing. And man, I really feel like we're just getting started. And so, we're just really at the ground floor of this podcast, continuing to grow, continuing to find new ways and additional ways to add value to our audience, to our listeners. So we're just thankful for you and your consistency with showing up. On that vein, before we dive into the topic today, I want to talk about Entrepreneur 0 to 100. So Entrepreneur 0 to 100 is an entrepreneur community that was just created 3 weeks ago, where we get together every single week on a Wednesday evening from 8 p.m. to 9:30 p.m., and we bring a community of entrepreneurs together, and we teach you, we develop, we implement and help you with strategies on creating a 6-figure business. And one of the things that I've realized over the years is that I have not been able to create the kind of businesses that I desire without community. And I've been in one-on-one coach for quite some time, and one of the things that I've always knew was a gap in my coaching was a community for my clients to plug themselves into. And so not only are you in a community with entrepreneurs all over the world that are aspiring in different industries and different verticals, but also clients, and my clients that I've worked with for 6 months to a year now are also on the inside of this to also help and support you as well. So if you're interested in learning more about Entrepreneur 0 to 100, visit me on Instagram. That's where you can find me. Go to my Instagram at _Justin Carter, and you can find everything there is to know about Entrepreneur 0 to 100 on my Instagram. We'd love to talk to you about joining. It's only $1 to join, by the way. $1 to join. And so if you're really interested in it, go to _Justin Carter on Instagram and shoot me a DM, and we'll get you enrolled. All right, let's dive into this episode. So today I want to talk about how to execute at a higher level, how to execute better. Execution is better than strategy. Execution is so much better than strategy. In this day and age, and myself included, I can get so caught up with strategy. I am a strategic thinker. I love to think about strategy. I love to think about the next 5 steps, the next 10 steps, the next 20 steps that I should be accomplishing when I think of an idea or a plan. But one thing that I've come to understand about myself is that if I spend too much time in strategy, I spend very little time in execution. In fact, I think a lot of the time that you spend, the more time you spend in execution, the less time that you have to spend in actual implementation and actual execution. And so it's almost like a limited resource, that brain power that you get, and you get to divide how much you spend in strategy versus how much you spend in execution. And so in this episode, I want to help you get better at executing and get better at being intentional about the results that you are creating strategy for. And so execution is much better and higher than strategy. In fact, how you can make execution the actual strategy, right? Like how can you actually make execution the actual strategy? Not strategy being the strategy, but execution being the actual strategy. And so If you can reflect on all the ideas you have had and all the strategies you've created, you've determined that the problem is execution. Uh, I know that there is not a lack of ideas in this world. You, if you're listening to this, probably do not have a struggle with creating new ideas and thinking of new concepts and thinking strategically about how you can implement said ideas, concepts, and ideas. But the struggle comes down to the actual execution portion. Strategy, in fact, is the easiest part. I'll tell you that. Not many people can do strategy and execution. That is the great separator. Can you do strategy and execution? Strategy is, in fact, the easiest part. Anyone can think through strategy. Like anyone can come up with a phenomenal idea and come up with conceptualization of how to implement and create the tangible thing of that idea. But action is the hard part. Because when it comes down to action, action is more than just conceptual, but action, it brings into play the real tangibles and the real outputs that come from you actually implementing the strategy that curated. And so I want to provide for you some really good tips on how to execute better. I believe your next step in life and how to make and live a pivoted life will not be based on you just being very strategic, but it will be based on your ability to execute on the strategy that you've created and have created all along. If just idea and strategy was all you needed, you would have been a millionaire by now because you have $1 million worth of strategy and ideas hitting on the inside of your brain that is yet to come out. Why? Because you struggle with execution. I'm talking to myself, not talking to you. You don't probably struggle with execution. I struggle with execution, okay? And so this podcast for me was a big culmination of execution. This was something that was completely new to me. Before I started the Pivot Mindset podcast, I want to say I have been guest on a couple podcasts prior, but I had never done a podcast, never produced a podcast. And when I first started, I did everything myself. I did the editing. I did the YouTube channel. I did the distribution platforms. I did the show notes. I did the thumbnails. I pulled the clips out to post on social media. I literally did the entire thing myself. And it was a vow of execution. It was, you know what? I'm going to start this thing and I'm going to finish what I started. I'm going to implement what I strategically thought about. And so what I'm doing right now in this podcast is a mirror of execution for me. And so I want to give you some tips on how to execute better. So the first one, and I'm looking at my notes here. You guys know that I kind of, depending on the topic, I bounce back and forth between notes and not. This one, I've got notes because I want to intentionally help you guys with some things. So point one on how to execute better is fast is slow and slow is fast. It's the classic rabbit and the hare, right? It's the tortoise and the hare, where right the rabbit starts off really fast and the tortoise is just creeping along going slow. And it's the principle taught that we understand also in military is when you are on a mission, being slow is extremely fast. Because what slowness does is slowness ensures you are moving at the pace of your training and your experience. This is, I think, one of the biggest challenges with executing properly is when people want to start a thing, they have so much passion and excitement to get started, and that they go faster than their training and expertise would suggest. And so you might want to start a podcast, for example. You might not want to start off with producing 5 episodes a week. Maybe you start with 1, like I did. And I thought, man, if I could just create 1 podcast a week and just get consistent at executing on that, then I could jump up to the next, right? And so I'm at the point now on this podcast where I'm thinking about going to 2 episodes a week. And, and I have to ask myself, do I have the training and expertise to allow me to do that comfortably and consistently, okay? And so with speed comes complexity and error, right? If you want to execute better, I recommend that you slow everything down. If you truly look at the things that you thought about and that you didn't execute, it was probably because speed had a factor to do with it. And speed can be looked at in a couple different ways. Speed can be you thought about it and you tried to start too fast, or speed could be the pace in which your ideas were flowing, and you didn't have a filter to determine what ideas should I be executing on now versus the ideas I should be executing on later. And so everything started to come at you fast, and you bogged your brain down because your brain was running at a very high pace, and you didn't have the clarity necessary to truly take the action right now that truly mattered. There's only one or two actions that really are going to move the needle when it comes to execution, and sometimes speed stops you from doing that. And so I'm going to encourage you with the first point to slow everything down. Slow is fast, and fast is slow. If you can have the time to take the step back and expand your horizon for success, meaning, hey, instead of wanting to do this in 6 months, what if you push it out to a year or 18 months? I'm not saying that slowness means slowness shouldn't dictate procrastination. Slowness should dictate intentionality and slowness should dictate intentionality and excellence in what you do. It shouldn't indicate procrastination, all right? And so I want you to slow it down. Slow down your brain. Slow down your time horizon. Slow down on your ideas. Sometimes execution isn't able to happen because you're trying to do too many things at once. You're moving way too fast. You're trying to create a podcast, and you're trying to go back to school, and you're trying to have a kid, and you're trying to get married, and you're trying to move across the country, and you're trying to do all these things and squeeze them into one very tight time frame in your life. Slow it down. Slow it down. Slow is fast, and fast is slow, okay? 2 is you have to know that winning is in the consistency, that the consistency is the winning in itself. Like, for you to be consistent is the win. And let me look at my notes. I said, don't be just good in spurts. Can you keep showing up after the results aren't what you want? Can you keep showing up after and as if the results don't matter? And so I want to encourage you, actually don't look at the results. Only focus on the action you determined would be valuable when you built the strategy. I'll repeat that again. Only focus on the actions that you determined would be valuable when you built your strategy. And so when you thought about all the strategy and you started to implement, what valuable things did you determine? What did you determine would be valuable? Right? Because after strategy sets in, you have to be consistent. That is the crossover is, okay, now I've got strategy. How do I execute on being consistent? And consistency is the win. And so I want you to stop looking at the results. Stop looking at the outcome of the results. Consistency is what kills most of us with executing. We underestimate how much consistent, successful execution will require, and we exchange that consistent execution for new ideas to hopefully speed up the process. And so I want to just drop a pin right here is in that you probably don't need a new idea. You've got enough. You need execution. And new ideas can be like a drug that if you get a highness of a new idea and it gets you fired up and it gets your endorphins going, it gets your excitement going because it's something new. But it often is the thief of execution because all of your new ideas is distracting you from executing on the 13 previous ideas that you had that you didn't execute, all right? So consistency is the actual win. And so whatever you want to accomplish, don't have an output goal, have an input goal. What do I mean by that? For the podcast, for example, if you create and you want to create a podcast, let's say, some people will say, man, I want to create a podcast and I want to have a goal of making $10,000 from the podcast in the first 12 months or in the first 6 months or whatever time frame, right? I want to discourage you from doing that. I want to encourage you to not have a outcome goal, but have an income goal. And that say, instead of saying how much money you want to make, say, man, I actually want to record 50 episodes. That is my goal. Whatever happens as a result of the 50 episodes is what happens. Right? But I want to record 100 episodes. Start having a goal of input and not output. If you get so caught up on the results and the scoreboard, it could stop you from being consistent. And so if you only focus on the input and the input is the win and the consistency of the input becomes the win, then all the results will eventually follow after you put in the work to execute, right? And so again, make sure that you break down your goals into inputs and not outputs. I know I can struggle with this one personally. A lot of my goals are output related, and that's important. It's not to say that we don't have and stress the importance of output and tangible results and fruit from what you're doing. But if you're struggling with execution, this tip number 2 is for you, is to know that winning is being consistent. All right. Now let's jump to the third one. It's KISS, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid, right? Most of you have heard that term before, KISS. You got to keep it simple. How can you simplify your process and take out the friction of execution? Man, this is a huge one. This is probably my best tip that I could give you is you got to take out the friction of execution. You have to keep everything as simple as possible. Make execution super simple and easy to attain. Executing on that goal has to be really easy. So, for example, for the podcast, when I created the podcast, I turned my basement into a podcast studio, and I created a fixated, permanent location that I could record my podcast. I've got my mic structured and already set up. I have my light here already structured and set up. My light even comes with a remote, so I don't even have to unplug it or plug it in. All I have to do is hit the power button on my remote, have to crack the Rodecaster Pro on and start recording. Hit the record button on my camera and just start recording. You've got to remove the friction. I know that if my podcast setup was temporary and I have to tear it down and build it up to do one episode or anytime I was going to record, it would add another layer of complexity or friction into my process and into recording. I need to know that when I've got an idea for a podcast, that the minute that I've got the idea, I can execute on it, right? That is true success, is when you go from idea to execution and that gap being very narrow, it being a very small gap. How do you jump from idea to execution? That is success. That is the success, the ability to accomplish that time after time after time, right? So I want you to think, how can you take the friction out of all the results and all the success that you want to accomplish, right? If you want to go to the gym every day and you want to start getting in the habit of working out, I recommend that you go to sleep in your workout clothes and that you put your water and your pre-workout and your gym shoes, everything you need, your gym bag, your headphones, you put everything you need out that night before, so that right when you wake up, all you got to do is, brush your teeth, wash your face, right? Throw everything, grab everything and hit the road, right? You simplify, you take the friction out of it. Instead of when you wake up, you got to figure out what you're going to wear that morning, and then you got to figure out what shoes you're going to put on, and then you got to, think about the weather the next day, and if you want to wear, take the friction out of it. Here's another thing, right? If you wanted to be really intense and if fitness was a significant aspect of your life and what you wanted to really accomplish, move closer to the gym. Move close as possible to the gym. Maybe your gym has a high rise on top of it, and you need to find a way to live in that high rise. So all you got to do is take a couple walks down the flights of stairs or take the elevator down to go to the gym, right? Are you in walking distance to the gym, right? This is what I'm saying, guys, is if it's important to you, if you really want to execute it, you've got to find a way to remove the friction, to take the friction out of the action necessary. You got to take the friction out. You have to lessen that to be able to execute better. And so until it becomes a muscle, you got to make it simple and easy to actually execute. And so that was point number 3. Point number 3 was to keep it as simple as possible and to reduce all of the friction of execution. So let me review these again with you really quick. So here are the tips to execute at a better level. Is understand that fast is slow and slow is fast. I need you to slow down your processing, your decision-making, and the speed and the pace in which you make decisions. Often failures happen because you were going too fast. You were moving way too fast. If I dribble a basketball in place, I'm all right. But when I try to dribble a basketball and run full speed, I can get a little sloppy, right? I'm moving way too fast. When you move fast, your principles, your training, and your experience start to break down because they're only as good at the speed and pace in which you've already executed on at a level, all right? So fast is slow and slow is fast is tip number 1. 2, is know that winning is in consistency. Consistency is the actual win. And so you have to create a pattern. You have to create a life where consistency is the number one priority for your life to accomplish all the goals that you want. Don't just be good in spurts. You got to be consistent. And then the third one is you have to simplify. You have to keep it simple. Keep it simple and remove the friction that execution currently has in your life. Look at what the decision that you're struggling with being consistent in and remove all the friction. If you want to find a way to eat better, you got to just apply first groceries in the house that are healthier. If you're struggling with going to the grocery store, hire DoorDash or find a private shopper to deliver groceries for you. Hire someone to do meal plans for you. If it's important enough, you will pay and you will do whatever you got to do to remove the friction out of the execution. All right. And so that is my tips for you on how to execute better. Remember, execution is better than strategy. Don't just get so good at strategy that you fumble and struggle with execution. If you want to live a pivoted life, you got to know that it's all about executing at the highest level possible. All right. And so I thank you for checking out this episode. Remember, life is all about the pivots, and those who decide to make the pivots decide to become successful. Peace.